It's 10:32 or 10:33, so I think I start the, at least my part of welcoming people to this Zoom meeting. I got an email the other day from a constituent that said about the traffic on the coastside, we need to come up with some creative ideas. And looking at the agenda, it looks like there's a lot of creative ideas. So I'm Don Horsley, I'm the county supervisor. So I want to welcome everybody and thank you for joining us this morning for a virtual conversation about Connect the Coastside, which is, of course, a community-based transportation plan to help improve mobility and safety on the coastside. I think we've been working on this for probably about 6 years or so. So in any case, today we're here to learn more about the Connect the Coastside and how it's being developed. And some of you may have been involved from this process from the beginning, and others will be hearing about this plan for the very first time. So our team will be giving an overview, and through an interactive discussion, we hope to hear your perspectives and feedback about the problems and solutions to inform Connect the Coastside. So I'd like to thank the Mid-Coast Community Council for their leadership and help with this community outreach. And now I will turn it over to Katie Faulkner, a member of our planning team, to get started.
Thanks, Supervisor Horsley. I'm Katie Faulkner. I am a long-range planner with Planning and Building with the County of San Mateo. Now that we hopefully have most people here, I'll just quickly review some technology notes. Again, microphones for participants will be muted for the presentation. And for all those co-hosts out there, I also recommend that you mute your microphones right now, just so we cut down on barking dogs or whatever in the background. I want to note that this workshop is being recorded, so just everyone who's on here, just be aware of that. We are recording the presentation part and the report out part, and those will be posted online so that anyone who missed the initial presentation can view those later. And we also want people to submit any questions they have in the chat box to Debbie Schechter. So we have all the different co-hosts listed in the chat box, but we ask you to direct your questions specifically to Debbie, and then we'll have a time at the end of the presentation where we can go over some of those questions. And if you're having any technical difficulties with Zoom, we have Elaine, member of our IT department here, and you can email her with your questions. And hopefully everyone's doing okay with getting on Zoom, but just in case. All right. Okay, so like Supervisor Horsley said, we're here to talk about Connect the Coastside today. And so today we will present you with some overview information about the goals of the plan and the types of projects recommended in the plan, and we will have a conversation about these goals and the projects. So today we want to hear from you if Connect the Coastside has the right goals and which kinds of projects are a priority for the community. We will be also hosting 2 more conversations after this meeting. The first will be held on June 15th, and it will focus more specifically on the projects recommended for the Moss Beach and Montera areas. And the second meeting will be on the third meeting will be on June 25th, and that one will focus specifically on projects recommended for Princeton, El Granada, and Miramar. And so now I will introduce a few of our Connect the Coastside team members. First, we have Debbie Schechter, who is our lead facilitator for today, and she'll be doing a little bit of talking later on. So hi, Debbie. Then we have Joe LeClaire, our planning manager for Planning and Building, and he will be helping to answer some questions later. And we also have Shonda Singh, our senior transportation planner, and she's also going to be helping answer some questions. All right, so now I'll hand it over to Debbie.
Thanks, Katie, and thanks everyone for joining us today. as we all would prefer to have this meeting in person, but we really appreciate that you can join us via Zoom. And we ask that you have a little patience with us as we navigate the technology, and we all are in this and learning together, and we're doing the best that we can. I am the facilitator for the meeting, which means my role is to guide the process, to help us have an effective meeting and to help people participate. So what I'd like to do today is to, as Katie said, the purpose is of this meeting is for you all to learn about Connect the Coastside and to talk with each other about your perspectives on transportation and share your feedback with the county about the transportation improvements you'd like to see. As Katie mentioned, this is our first meeting. There will be other opportunities for you to give your input, and we'll be talking about that as we go along. So our agenda today, we just completed the welcome portion. I'm going to go over some group agreements so that we can have an effective meeting. We'll find out a little bit about who's in the room, the Zoom room. Katie will give a presentation on Connect the Coastside. And then we will have a conversation in breakout groups, about 25 minutes. I forgot to mention that after Katie's presentation, we'll have the opportunity for just a few clarifying questions. So if folks can send me their questions in the chat, that would be great. We know we won't be able to get to all of them, and we'll talk about how we'll answer the rest of them later. So again, we're going to spend about 25 minutes in breakout groups where you'll be able to talk with your neighbors about transportation improvements that you'd like to see. And those groups will be facilitated. We will have a brief report out so you can hear a really quick summary of what was discussed in the breakout groups. Then Katie will talk about next steps, and we'll close the meeting at noon. There are going to be several ways to provide input during the meeting and after. In the presentation, there's going to be some poll questions so that you'll be able to participate in. So we'll ask you to kind of be aware and participate in those. As I mentioned, we'll take a few questions after the presentation. You'll be able to share your input in the breakout rooms, and then you'll hear more at the end about a post-meeting survey. So group agreements is a facilitator tool that we like to use to help ensure that people can participate effectively. And in this meeting, these mainly apply in the breakout groups. And so we'd like you to speak from your own experience, what you've experienced about transportation in the coastside. Listen for understanding. So a lot of times we are just waiting for the other person to stop talking so we can respond. We ask you not to do that here. We ask you really to listen, to understand what other people are sharing and their perspectives. We ask that you respect differences and be curious. Let everyone participate and allow the facilitator to guide the process. So at the bottom of your screen, you have a reaction button, and I'd love it if people could give a thumbs up, showing that they will follow the group agreements today. I'm just getting some waves and some thumbs up. I appreciate that. Thank you, thank you. Thanks very much. Okay, this is normally the time where we would say, feel free to get up and stretch, make yourself comfortable. Hopefully you all are already doing that at home. Have a glass of water, whatever you need to take care of yourself and make the meeting as effective as it can be for you. All right, thank you. So with that, we are going to find out a little bit about who is in the room today. And I'm going to launch a poll. So you should be able to see this first poll question, which asks, where do you live and or work on the coastside? So I'll give you a little bit of time to select your answer.
I have a question about that. I have two answers and it's only allowing me to do one because I live in one place and work in another.
So pick where you live.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, I'll give a few more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, I'm going to share the results. It looks like about half the folks on the phone today live in Moss Beach, about 21% in El Granada, 12% in Montera, 3% in Half Moon Bay, and 15% other. So maybe those are folks who are visiting the Coastside. Thank you very much. All right, and we have another poll, which has to do with what has been your exposure to the Connect the Coastside plan. So we want to know a little bit about how much do you know about the plan. So our choices are, I've been to a meeting about the plan, I've watched the video, I've read the plan, I've heard about what's in it, I know very little about the plan. All right, I'll give you a few more seconds to respond. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's see our results. Wow, so it looks like we have quite a few people who are pretty knowledgeable about the plan. 43% have been to a meeting, 31% have read the plan, and then some folks who have heard about the plan, and about 11% who know very little. So we will try to make this meeting effective for all of you. For folks who know very little, you will learn a lot today, and for folks who are more familiar, you will learn some as well. I want to point out that the county has prepared a video. I believe it was posted this week on their website. Because you're participating in this meeting, you will learn pretty much everything about what's in the video, but it's a nice introduction to the Connect the Coastside plan if you have friends or neighbors who weren't able to make the meeting today. Okay, thank you for participating in the poll. So now I'm going to turn it over to Katie to give the presentation on Connect the Coastside plan, and then just a reminder, if questions come up for you during the presentation, please send them to me in the chat, and we will have time just for a few clarifying questions at the end of the presentation, and the remaining questions, we will go back and prepare answers and put those out as part of a meeting summary. So thanks, everyone.
Hey, thanks, Debbie. So to give you an idea of what you'll hear in this presentation, I will review the themes we've heard from the recent Listening to the Midcoast survey, give you a broad overview of the plan, review the currently written goals for this plan, review the recommended projects, and talk about how these projects would be implemented once the plan is finalized. Now let's review some of the survey themes from Listening to the Midcoast. So the County of San Mateo and the Midcoast Community Council recently released a survey to learn about how people on the Midcoast walk, bike, take the bus, and use cars. And the survey helps to paint a picture of what it's usually like to travel around the Midcoast. So this survey asked people an open-ended question about what's working well and what's been the biggest challenge when it comes to getting around the Midcoast. On the screen now is a word cloud created from the answers, and the size of the word shows you how much that word was used. So for example, the word traffic was used a lot. So to give you some examples of what people said about what was working well, they said things like the coastal trail, bike paths, light traffic on weekdays, and living in a beautiful setting. Sorry. And for challenges, people mentioned things like traffic on the weekends and during rush hour and school drop-off times, very little public transportation, trying to cross Highway 1 on foot, and incomplete bike paths. So the survey also asked people what changes they would most like to see on the coast side, and the answers included things like more protected bike routes, on-demand beacon crosswalks on Highway 1, more and easier access to the coast, speed bumps on certain roads, more lanes added to Highway 1, bring back school buses to help fix the morning commute, and roundabouts to help ease traffic to help ease stop and go traffic. So I will say that one of the challenges we deal with when trying to put together a plan like this is that different people all have different needs, priorities, and ideas about what will work and what won't work. And that's part of the reason that we're having this meeting today, so that we can talk about these differences with each other and help each other understand and find areas where we can all agree. So one of the multiple choice questions that we asked in the survey was, how important are the following issues to you? So the top issues that people said are either very important or important were reducing traffic was number one at 92%, followed by improving safety for walking and biking, improving safety for students walking or biking to school, improving safety for evacuations. And then going on down the list, we have adding or improving sidewalks in high traffic areas, improving safety for drivers, improving bus service and access to bus stops, making it easier to access parks and beaches, and adding more parking had the smallest percentage of people who viewed it as either important or very important. Okay, so now that we've set the stage a little bit, I'll tell you about the plan itself. So this effort was originally born out of the last update of the local coastal program, which for reference is a set of policies that is used to guide development in the coastal zone while protecting coastal resources. So the update to the program included a policy that called for the development of a comprehensive transportation management plan to address the traffic impacts of development on roads and highways in the Mid-Coast. So what exactly do I mean when I say comprehensive transportation plan? Well, I mean that this plan covers the topics of walking, biking, public transit, driving, and land use. So the plan looks at existing conditions and makes some estimates about future conditions, and then recommends projects to improve traveling around the Mid-Coast. The benefit of Connect the Coastside is that it will create an overall vision for transportation on the Mid-Coast, and it clarifies the priorities for future investments in transportation. And another benefit of looking at all these different topics in one plan is that we can coordinate our recommendations to make sure that all these modes of travel work together. So for example, if car traffic is really bad on the coast side, then we can make improvements to give people the option to either walk or bike to their local destinations. And that could in turn help ease the car traffic. Or we could add sidewalks and crosswalks in the vicinity of bus stops to make it easier for people to take the bus. Okay, now let's talk about the planning area for Connect the Coastside, which is shown on the map in purple. So the planning area shows where Connect the Coastside has recommended projects, and it includes the unincorporated areas surrounding Highway 1 and Highway 92. And the orange color on the map shows our traffic analysis area, which helped to provide some background information used to make some of these recommendations. So in particular, this plan focuses on the unincorporated Mid-Coast, which is shown on this map. So for reference, when I say unincorporated, I mean the parts of the county that are outside of a city's boundaries. So for example, Half Moon Bay is an incorporated city, but Montara, Moss Beach, El Granada, Princeton, and Miramar are all unincorporated communities in the Mid-Coast that are served by the county government. So at this point, I'd like to mention that there are several other planning efforts currently underway in the county that you might also be hearing about. These include the San Mateo County Active Transportation Plan, which looks at different ways to make walking and biking safe and comfortable for the entire unincorporated county. The San Mateo County Climate Action Plan, which looks at strategies that can reduce carbon emissions. Plan Princeton, which will update the policies, plans, and standards regulating the Princeton area. Reimagine Samtrans, which is analyzing Samtrans' services and looking for ways to improve those services. So while some of these areas overlap, well, there are some areas of overlap between these planning efforts and Connect the Coastside. All these different plans have different scopes, different planning areas, and different overall goals. And where these plans do overlap, we're working together to make sure that they complement one another. Okay, so now I'll switch back to Connect the Coastside and talk about our planning goals. So as we've been working on this plan and talking to different people who live, work, and visit the Mid-Coast, we've heard a few different themes emerge about what's important when considering transportation improvements. Distilled down, those things are improving traffic, increasing safety, increasing transportation choices, increasing environmental sustainability, providing access to the coast, and preserving Mid-Coast character. Okay, so now we'll take a little break for a poll question. So what has been your, let's see, Debbie, I think I'm seeing what has been your exposure to the Connect the Coastside plan. Okay, great, here we go. So in thinking about your transportation priorities, what is most important to you? Improving traffic, safety, having transportation choices, sustainability, coastal access, preserving Mid-Coast character. And I believe on this one you can pick more than one if a few of them are important to you. So we'll just give people a few minutes. All right, and it looks like we're done with that poll. Okay, so some interesting results. It looks like improving traffic and preserving Mid-Coast character are both pretty important to people, and 58% of people chose those. Safety is also following close behind at 54%, and other people also care about having transportation choices and sustainability and coastal access. Okay, thanks everybody. All right, moving on. So right now the plan lists 5 goals that were created based on what we heard from past outreach efforts. And I will quickly review those goals now. So goal 1, improve existing traffic and roadway conditions on the Mid-Coast. Goal 2, lessen the cumulative traffic impacts from future development on the Mid-Coast. Goal 3, increase opportunities for walking, biking, and riding transit on the Mid-Coast to provide an alternative to motor vehicles and reduce roadway traffic. Goal 4, respect the character of Mid-Coast communities, protect coastal resources. And goal 5, maintain and improve access to coastal resources for both residents and visitors. Okay, so now we're going to take a break for another quick poll question.
Whoops. Is that right? Uh-oh, sorry.
There we go. Okay, great. So, focusing on the goals of the plan, which one's your highest priority? And these are basically just the goals that I just listed, so let us know what you think. And again, we'll wait a few moments for everyone to make their choices.
All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Okay, so looks like we have a few different votes, but goal 3, increased opportunities for walking, biking, and riding transit on the Mid-Coast, had our most votes at 34%. Respect to the character of Mid-Coast communities was also up there at 31%, followed by lessening the cumulative traffic impacts. All right, well, thanks everybody for sharing your thoughts. Okay, now let's talk about the recommended projects. I'll start with walking. So the draft plan recommends building the parallel trail, which will be a physically separated multimodal trail along the east side of Highway 1. The parallel trail will connect Montera, Moss Beach, El Granada, Miramar, and Half Moon Bay, so that people will be able to walk and ride their bikes between these communities without having to use Highway 1. The plan also recommends installing several marked crossings across Highway 1 and adding sidewalks to create continuous walking paths. And finally, the plan recommends completing the coastal trail, which is on the east side of Highway 1, throughout the entire study area. Okay, moving on to bike-related improvements. So the parallel trail will also serve people who ride bikes as well as people who walk. In addition, the draft plan recommends adding bike lanes along Highway 1 throughout the entire Mid-Coast area, creating more space for bikes on Highway 92, adding either a shared bike route, a striped bike lane, or a separated bike trail along Airport Street, widening the shoulders of Capistrano Road to better accommodate cyclists, and installing bicycle parking throughout the Mid-Coast. To improve driving on the Mid-Coast and along Highway 92, the plan recommends adding turn lanes and acceleration lanes at Gray Whale Cove, adding left turn lanes at major businesses and extending the passing lanes on Highway 92, adding stop signs at side streets that intersect with Highway 1, adding either roundabouts or signals at certain intersections with heavy traffic along Highway 1 and Highway 92, making improvements to Main Street in Montera and Carlos Street in Moss Beach to slow traffic speeds and make those streets more friendly for walking and biking. And finally, the plan also recommends creating new standardized roadway designs for Highway 1 near the populated community centers. The plan also recommends transit improvements, including improving bus stops by adding benches or shelters, making it safer to walk to bus stops by adding marked crosswalks and sidewalks, working with Samtrans to improve transit service on the Mid-Coast, and developing a multi-purpose parking lot, which could be used as a park and ride for commuters during the week and by visitors on the weekend and during events. So the way we use land has a major impact on traffic and the way people travel. Connect the Coastside recommends land use programs and policies that would reduce future development. More transportation options and less development on the Mid-Coast can help reduce the number of drivers on the road. So a lot merger program could reduce the number of lots and homes built in the Mid-Coast by merging neighboring lots with the same owner if those lots are too small to meet current development standards. This would result in the creation of a single larger parcel and would result in more on-site and private open space. A lot retirement program could help reduce Mid-Coast development by requiring one-to-one retirement of development rights on existing lots in exchange for the creation of new lots subdivided from another property. And lastly, the plan recommends a transportation impact mitigation fee to collect money from developers who build on the Mid-Coast. These fees would help pay for projects included in Connect the Coastside and serve as a potential deterrent to development. I will also note that the local coastal program currently limits residential development on the Mid-Coast to 40 new homes a year to ensure that things like roads, utilities, and schools are not overburdened by a rapid residential growth. Okay, another poll question. So this one will ask, which modes do you most want to see improvements in? Looks like we'll have that up in just a second. There we go. All right, so let us know what you think. Walking, biking, public transit, driving, land use.
All right, a few more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, let's see the results.
Okay, interesting. I mean, it looks like biking got the most at 25%, but people also picked, across the board. So that's good feedback, and, we're recommending projects in all those topics, so thank you. Okay. Moving on. Let's hypothetically jump forward a little bit and imagine that this plan is all finalized and approved. So how will these projects be implemented? How would they be paid for? So one thing to note is that these projects won't happen all at once. They will be implemented over, say, the next 20 years. Some projects will happen in the short term, just a few years from now, some in the medium term, maybe more like 10 years from now, and some projects would be long-term goals and could take the full 20 years to happen. And over the years, these projects will be paid for with a mix of county funding, regional or statewide grants, and the new land use policy that would collect fees from development. So the plan currently has a project evaluation system to prioritize the projects and project timing. This evaluation system rates projects based on cost, ease of implementation, multimodal connectivity, safety and circulation, shoreline access, and annual costs. And we want to update this priority list to incorporate the feedback we receive at meetings like this. And while we have this ranking system, we might also be able to implement certain projects opportunistically. So for example, a grant fund might become available for, say, a bike path, and we would take that opportunity to start the project a little bit earlier. Or one of these projects or part of the project could be implemented as a requirement of new private development. And again, it might happen a little sooner than we thought. So each of these projects will be implemented with their own public process and noticing. So that's just something else to consider. And that wraps up my presentation for right now. So I'm going to hand things back to Debbie. Now it's time for questions.
Thanks, Katie. So let's see, we have a little bit more time for questions than we thought. So we are going to take a few clarifying questions on the presentation. I've been collecting them in the chat. I'm going to go through them in a minute. But I want folks to know that if we don't get a chance to ask your question, you can still get an answer. We are going to record all of the questions and put out a summary report, and that will include all of the questions and answers that came up today. Also, in the post-meeting survey, you'll have an opportunity to ask some more questions. So I want to reassure folks that just because your question doesn't get answered in this moment, you will be able to get an answer. Okay, so I have a few questions that we received. So one that I'm going to start with is, can you please clarify how Connect the Coastside blends with transportation planning in Half Moon Bay? And I would say related to that, how does Highway 92 relate to Connect the Coastside?
I'd be happy to answer that question. So when Connect the Coastside was developed, it was developed as you think about that project map that Katie showed. It showed the traffic planning area that included Half Moon Bay. And early on in the process, the Connect the Coastside plan was developed, including recommendations for Half Moon Bay. So the same consultant that worked with us on developing recommendations for Connect the Coastside also was working for Half Moon Bay and developing recommendations for traffic improvements there. Those traffic improvements were excised from the plan at the request of the city of Half Moon Bay, and they have integrated those that they feel are most appropriate into their general planning process. So that's how we addressed Half Moon Bay. With regard to Highway 92, this plan includes a number of recommendations, including potential roundabouts in a couple locations where 35 and Highway 92 intersect, improvements for bicycle access and turn lanes and pedestrian crossings to address those high traffic areas along Highway 92.
Thanks, Joe. So our next question is there a short-term phase? And it refers to the cost, this question refers to the cost of the roundabouts at about $5 million, and the person feels like this is far out. So they want to know, is there a short-term phase planned for Connect the Coastside?
Well, Connect the Coastside will be implemented opportunistically based on available funding. So there may be some points in time in the next few years where a couple of development projects trigger the need for developing intersection control in a timely fashion. And if that comes to pass, then we will confront the question of whether to install roundabouts or signals at those intersections at that time. But the first project of Connect Coastside that's hopefully going to go out to bid for construction this fall will be the segment of the multimodal or parallel trail that connects Half Moon Bay with El Granada. So we have to secure funding for all of these projects, and we will develop them as quickly as we can based on available funding.
Yeah, I could also jump in and say, right now the draft plan does break projects up into short-term, medium-term, and long-term, based on that evaluation system I was talking about. So we do have a bit of a list now, but that could be updated based on what we hear during this outreach phase, basically. So that's on page 90 of the plan if you want to go look at it.
Great. So our next question is, how do you plan on lessening the cumulative effect of new projects on the coast? And there's also a specific question about the status of the big wave development.
Well, as Katie described in her presentation, there's a suite of land use strategies that were required by the Coastal Commission for the county to consider, including lot merger, lot retirement, and developer fees on new projects to both help fund transportation improvements and to serve as somewhat of a deterrent on development. So those are the strategies that are incorporated into the plan to address that issue. And the second part of the question?
The status of the big wave development?
Yeah, big wave development is working through, they've just recorded their tentative map or their final map. And so they're now in the building permit review process. So I can't predict what their financial picture is and when they'll be able to actually start construction, but they've moved beyond the map recordation stage, and now they're in building permit review.
Thanks, Joe. So this is a question about the impact of, oh, sorry, I just lost it. This is a question about the impact of COVID on budgets. Here it is. So given the giant hit both the federal and state and local economies have taken due to COVID, what can you say about the probability of receiving any funding for the transportation improvements in Connect the Coastside?
Well, while the COVID crisis has certainly affected all governmental budgets up and down the line from local to federal, it has not eliminated funding for transportation improvements. There are still programmed funds that will be coming to the state from the federal government and from the state down to the local governments The county is still collecting sales tax, so there will still be funding for transportation projects, but in the short run, it will probably be diminished slightly, and it will depend on how long the COVID crisis lasts and what its impact is on the economy. We're only 3 months into it, so it's difficult to predict how lasting those effects will be.
Debbie, you're muted.
Sorry about that. We're going to take one last question, which is, do you consider the plan to be age friendly? Which I believe means, is it appropriate for people of all ages and abilities?
I would say yes. We have endeavored to address, I think, the needs of school students making their way to school, and the elderly who would like to walk along the beach or cross the highway safely, and or cycle. I believe that
Oh,
plan is really aimed at all cohorts, and I think that one of the things that we conduct these meetings for is to get feedback so that we can make the plan more responsive to community interests. And one of the things that we've learned since we published the plan in January was the importance of safe routes to schools. So we are both coordinating with our colleagues in Office of Sustainability on the active transportation plan to make sure that safe routes to schools is supported in both of those planning documents.
But I will say, we do plan to update this Connect the Coastside. So if we haven't addressed a topic sufficiently, maybe this is an opportunity to say, have a section where we look at the needs of seniors and address that specifically. And if we need to add some things, we can add some things. So that's a good point.
okay, so thank you everyone for your questions. As I mentioned, the rest of the questions in the chat will be answered, just not today, because we want to make sure that folks have time to give input on the plan in the breakout groups. So I'm going to explain how the breakout groups work. Do we have a slide on that? Oh, great. Okay. So what we are going to do, and again, we hope that the technology cooperates with us here. This is one of the challenging parts, is we are putting folks into breakout groups of about 4 people, 4 participants, because we want you to have an opportunity to discuss some specific questions. And so here's how the breakout groups will work. You may also in your group have a listener/observer. So we have some members of the Mid-Coast Community Council who would like to observe and listen to the conversations as your elected officials. They want to be able to hear what you all have to say. So you may have a member of the MCC in your group, and they will identify themselves and tell you if they are listening or if they're participating. We may also have a member of the county staff in your group who also will be listening. So we ask that you just respect that that's their roles, to be listening and not ask them too many questions. So each of your breakout groups will be facilitated, and the facilitator's role is to help guide the conversation and make sure that everyone has a chance to participate and share your perspectives. They also will be taking notes. They will have a document that will be shared on their screen that you will see, and they'll be taking notes. So they're not going to capture every word of what you say, but their job is to capture the main points. And again, this information will be compiled and will be part of the summary report as well. So just a couple instructions for the breakout rooms. If you could turn your video on. When you enter the breakout room, you will be unmuted. You may receive a message asking you to join the breakout group, and you'll need to accept that. and we're going to be in the breakout rooms for about 25 minutes. You'll get a 3-minute warning, and then you'll get a 1-minute warning at the end of the breakout group. And then after that, you'll come back into the main room and we will hear a little bit about what happened in the breakout rooms. So the main point is that we want to hear about your hopes for the future of transportation on the coast side and learn about the types of improvements that are important to you. And we want to know if there's anything else that should be considered. So these are the 3 questions that we're going to focus on discussing in your breakout groups. You'll have an opportunity to share your views and hear from others. And as I mentioned, your facilitator will take notes and then report out very briefly on a couple of key themes. So with that, Janeth is going to move us into breakout rooms. It may take a couple of minutes before we get everybody assigned to a room. It's a little challenging to do this on the fly. So please, again, be patient with us and have a good conversation, and we'll see you in about 25 minutes. I know we had some challenges with moving people around a little bit, but I hope that worked for people. We do want to hear your feedback, and we'll tell you a little bit more about how you can do that later. And so right now, what we want to do is hear about some of the main themes that came up in your conversations. And so we're going to go through each of the breakout groups one by one, and I'm going to ask the facilitators to share some of the main themes. So let's start with Jose and breakout room 1.
Hello, everybody. Thank you. So the 3 key themes that we identified was 1, safety, traffic circles for drivers and people on bikes and walking. 2, multimodal trails from Montara to Half Moon Bay. And then 3, improving current traffic conditions with safety in mind.
Improving current traffic conditions with safety in mind. So that means driving. Right?
Driving, but also potential evacuation plans for, any other general emergency.
Great, thank you. Thanks a lot, breakout group 1 and Jose. We appreciate hearing those themes. I heard safety, traffic circles, multimodal trails, improving traffic conditions with safety in mind. Great. So the next group is breakout group 2 with Leva and Camille.
Yes, and Camille, please feel free to add. I think the key theme were safety and access for all, safety for pedestrian, access for all, including ADA, people with special needs. Can you help me actually, Camille? I don't have my, I don't have the screen.
I think we got feedback. So we had 2 members, 3 members of the public, and 1 was a visitor and 2 were locals. And we had 1 local who basically said the plan seems right on. She lives in El Granada, and while she was hoping for more traffic improvements in her area, the plan demonstrated that there really wasn't the traffic volumes or pedestrian volumes or even public transit volumes that justify more improvements in her neighborhood versus other areas. So she kind of sees the rationale there of how the improvements were allocated. But then we also have another member of the public who's a resident of the coast who doesn't think that the plan's on track, who thinks that the improvements should be focused on pedestrian undercrossings to completely assure pedestrian safety and minimize disruption to traffic flow.
And when you say undercrossings, does that mean under Highway 1?
Yes, yes, I'm assuming that.
Okay.
And then the priorities were, yeah.
Oh, the priorities. The priorities that our 3 members thought that were most important was mostly vehicle improvements to vehicle traffic, as well as public transit and the pedestrian crossings and walking trails.
Great. Thank you very much for that report out. Let's go to group 3 and Ida. Ida, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so my group was very concerned. It shows that they are very passionate about the safety and the plans for the community. So I appreciate that. And the first minutes were dedicated to talk about some concerns about this meeting. Like they were asking if the breakout room discussions are being recorded. They were asking why the discussion was limited to these 3 questions. And then we started talking about the topics.
Mm-hmm.
They mentioned concern about bike tracks, about moving around in using the bicycle and not being able to find where to put it. They also mentioned that traffic has been worse in the last couple of weeks, and the normal problems were exacerbated. That litter fines, there's a huge problem with that in the highway, and that traffic enforcement needs to be improved. Regarding the second question, they mentioned that these are good goals, but they mentioned that it seems they are concerned about the interpretation of these goals on the county's parts and other interested parties. Because they said, and I quote, that the devil is on the details. Also, there's a concern about the cost and the budget, that it seems like a wish list, and that they need like more details, and that these plans need to be very comprehensive. And we didn't have time to discuss question number 3, but I would encourage my group to send them their thoughts to the meeting leaders, or Debbie, or because I'm concerned that we didn't have time to discuss question number 3.
Thank you for that report out. So I do want to explain, and Katie will talk about this as well. There will be a post-meeting survey that gets sent to all attendees. So it's unfortunate that it sounds like we didn't allow enough time in the small groups to get to all the questions. So that's a good learning for us. And so the post-meeting survey is a great place for people to be able to add their comments that they weren't able to share today, or if they feel that it wasn't fully captured, that's another opportunity for participants to share your comments about the plan or the responses to the specific question, as well as any comments about the meeting and what can be improved. So you'll hear more about that in a minute. Thank you, Ida. So next, breakout group 4 with David and Caleb.
Since Caleb took the notes for our team, I'm going to let him take the floor.
Thank you, David. So there was a good discussion in our breakout group. There was a fair bit of discussion around the Cypress Point development project. A number of people had concerns about some of the traffic impacts related to that development. There was also a big focus in our group on some of the driving safety improvements. There was a lot of concerns about how difficult it is to get on and off of Highway 1. So there was some excitement around some of the infrastructure upgrades, like turn lanes, signals, possibly roundabouts, that kind of thing. There was an observation that it seems like a lot of the commute traffic in the Coastside area has gone down a bit since more people have started teleworking. And some people think that might continue for the foreseeable future. And otherwise, people were friendly to bicycle improvements. People were perhaps a bit concerned that public transportation usage may not be very strong for the foreseeable future, but there was some interest in possibly some sort of express transit service at some point to a BART station. So those were some of the key points from our group.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, David and Caleb. Next is breakout room 5, which is Warren and Will.
And one of the things that we made sure that were on the notes were several things that people brought up that didn't quite fit into the questions, but were great concerns and great things to pursue by the county and by the decision makers here. So we have those on the notes. One of the interesting things was around impact of the current stay in place and the impact of cutting or closing the parking lots down on the beaches have forced people in one sense to up into the neighborhoods. And the result of that has been more traffic in the neighborhoods, people leaving garbage there, including using yards as bathrooms and such. So that impact of just closing the parking lots. Secondly, there was a suggestion that there was a missing part in terms of the mitigation or results of the increased traffic. And that's again on our notes, that needs to be more clearly discussed. And also, when there's an area of development in one of the communities and they do some mitigation for that, they may not be aware of what that impact is on the surrounding neighbors nearby. And so to more effectively look at those, the impact that are on the sides of those projects, in addition to what they're doing for that project itself. Anything else, William, that you want to add?
No, I think that captures it. I think the running theme that our conversation took through all of those questions was that people want to see how much, whether the plan will address this or not. What they'd like to see is a cumulative look of the impacts of all of the potential development and all the potential improvements, including not just the county, but Half Moon Bay, and also a clear kind of timeline for short-term impacts, short-term improvements that will address immediate impacts.
And that would include, for example, the roundabout in certain areas. What's the impact on the people around there, and is that providing the kind of safety in terms of getting through certain areas? Thank you.
Great, thank you, Warren and Will. Group 6 was Alice and Jessica.
Jessica was the note taker, so I'll let her take over.
So our group had a really great discussion. I think there was acknowledgement that in the projects for walking, biking, driving, public transit, and land use, that all of those were equally important and sort of need to be addressed. But the 3 themes that sort of really rose to the top throughout all of the questions was that there needs to be an effort to create a safe environment, particularly for biking. There are no sort of, the infrastructure for biking doesn't really exist. You could say the same for the sidewalks too. It's sort of a hodgepodge patchwork as you go from community to community along the mid-coast, and there's no safe way to really link up to Half Moon Bay. Also, looking at traffic calming in a way where it speeds it up, where the traffic is sort of bottlenecked and currently slow right now, but it slows it down where currently it's people are driving too fast and recklessly. So making sure that the plan has that appropriate balance for the future so that the traffic moves in an appropriate way along the coast. And then lastly, looking at development projects for housing and making sure that it's balanced and timed with the traffic improvements. There was acknowledgement that traffic improvements do take a lot longer to be funded and to be implemented, whereas housing can go at a faster rate. And if you put in more housing without having the infrastructure for traffic in place, could really create a lot of problems for folks going forward. Alice, did you want to add anything?
That was good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you both. So group 7 is Robert and
Carrie.
And Carrie. Yeah.
Carrie and I are going to do a tag team. I'll start the first issue, and that is that we were a team of 3 people, 3 citizens were in our group: Sid, Judy and Rob Carey. The senior issue, making it age friendly, no matter what is done in the future or now, we're a real strong opinion that it should be age friendly. And there are a lot of examples in our notes, and I won't go over those in the interest of time. But Carrie, I'll tag over to you.
Great, thanks so much, Robert. Two of the areas we highlighted for project importance included walking and driving. One example is when you're driving out of the Moss Beach area, specifically at the intersection at Cypress. We talked about some improvements there. We also talked about just the condition of walkways and roadways and making that safer for residents and visitors. Another topic we touched on was traffic and gridlock, both before the COVID-19 pandemic, but also related it back to during this COVID-19 pandemic, and touched on some of the topics we've also already heard related to the parking closures at beaches and how that has forced people more to park in the neighborhoods. Thanks, that's all from me.
Yeah, specifically, it's an acceleration lane from Moss Beach because you come to a dead stop and then you've got to catch up with traffic that's doing 50 miles an hour. It's really tough for the Moss Beach residents. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert and Carrie. So our last breakout group was Jackie and Rachel.
Our group had a vibrant discussion with 3 participants and an observer, and we discussed many of the key themes that others have mentioned that were important, but really with an emphasis on improving walking and biking conditions. We heard the immediate need to address unsafe driving and speeding in residential streets. Some wanted to see that maintaining the character of the Mid-Coast, being small town and semi-rural, should be higher on the list of goals. There was agreement about wanting to see more short-term projects implemented and with examples like signage and speed bumps and enforcement of speeding. And then we heard about mixed feelings about having less people on the coast with shelter in place, you know, with the positive of less traffic, but with the negatives of impacts to the commercial vibrance on the coast. And finally, we heard also, like many others, about the concern for the future challenges of housing developments on traffic. Rachel, anything to add?
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Jackie.
Thanks so much for those great report outs. I took some notes on that, but we will have all of your notes. And just a couple of the themes that I heard, just to reiterate, a lot of discussion about safety and improvements, especially for walking and biking. Concern about traffic, both traffic, gridlock, as well as speeding from driving. And I think it sounds like the Coastside is a little bit unique in that, in some of the additional traffic impacts that you've seen in the neighborhoods during COVID. And then some comments on specific projects, as well as concerns about the impact of housing development on transportation and the need to balance those. So thank you so much for sharing your ideas in the breakout groups and for the conversation that you had and sharing those report outs. So with that,
before you go on, I just want to thank all of the facilitators, as well as all of the folks that participated in the process. I have to say, I'm not particularly surprised with any of the comments. I have been hearing them for years, for many years. But I really appreciate that people, they took the time to actually look at the plan and give us I think some pretty good feedback. And so I want to thank them and thank all of our facilitators as well. I wasn't able to bounce around. I just was at Jackie's, and she did a great job. So cool. And I guess we're going to do some additional ones. And I think there's some advantage to do. These Zoom things are a little, I mean, I sort of miss human contact myself, but one of the advantages to the Zoom process is that I think it's, if I'm not mistaken, from the point of view of the participant, is a little bit less intimidating. I know people, one of the things that people fear is public speaking or getting up in front of an audience and worried about, you know, the effect they're having on others. You can't really do that here. You're pretty much, you're a voice of one in essence. So I think it does have some advantages. And I think that there's other advantages. You're not having to drive someplace, park somewhere, kids watched by somebody else, or so it is convenient. It does lack the direct participation, but it is somewhat convenient. So in any case, I enjoyed listening, and thought the presentation was great. Just can thank all of you. Enjoy the rest of the weekend.
Thanks so much, Supervisor Horsley. And before you all leave, I know we're a few minutes past noon. I just want to give it back to Katie to talk about our next steps.
All right, thanks, Debbie. So we are currently in the outreach phase of this process, and we will be holding 2 more virtual meetings after this to gather more input on the plan. And after these 3 meetings are completed, we will release a report that summarizes what we heard. At that point, staff will then update the plan based on feedback, and these updates could include refining recommendations, adding new projects, or adding new information. And we've already heard some things that we think are good ideas, things like addressing evacuation, safe routes to schools, things like that. So after we've updated the plan, at that point, we will need to review our outreach efforts to date and decide if any more outreach is needed. You know, obviously we're in some funny times right now, and we didn't initially plan on virtual meetings. And so that's why we just need to check in at that point and see, you know, what else we might need to do. So after the public outreach and update processes are complete, then we would begin the final draft review process. So that would include presenting the plan to the Mid-Coast Community Council, Half Moon Bay, and the San Mateo County Planning Commission for their recommendations. And lastly, we would take the plan to the San Mateo County Board of Supervisors to consider approval. So like I said, we are going to be holding 2 more virtual conversations after this. The next meeting will be held on June 15th, and will focus on Moss Beach and Montera. And then the 3rd meeting will be scheduled for June 25th, and will focus on El Granada, Miramar, and Princeton. And we invite you to attend either of these meetings that interest you. And you can find registration information on the Connect the Coastside website. And also there are some links up on the screen right now. And that brings us to the end of the meeting, basically. If you have any questions or feedback, please feel free to reach out to us. And please visit the Connect the Coastside website for more information. Thank you for joining us today. And now I'm going to hand it to Debbie to just quickly review a post-meeting survey that we have, and we'll be sending to you.
Thanks, Katie. So we mentioned this briefly earlier. You will be shortly receiving a post-meeting survey where you will have your opportunity to share your feedback about the meeting today, as well as any other thoughts that you would like to share with the county about Connect the Coastside. So we encourage you, please, to fill out that survey. It's a good way to give the county more input on the plan, as well as to help us figure out how to improve these meetings for the next time. So again, we really appreciate everybody's time and participation today, and for bearing with us through the technology, and hope everybody is happy and healthy and safe and has a great weekend. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Everybody.